What's up? Welcome back to Guys Night Gaming. So, me and my group have been going through a few different systems for tabletop RPGs. Last one we did was Down Darker Trails. That's the Call of Cthulhu system, just Wild West. Next up, we have Warhammer 40k, Wrath Glory. I happened to pick up the starter set from our local gaming store, and I'm going to go ahead and go through and review that and some of the parts of the system. So, let's get started. Alright, so what we have here is the Warhammer 40k Roleplay Wrath and Glory starter set. I think there's a few different versions of this. The one that I have, it came incomplete. I don't have the dice with it, but it's from Ulysses, North America. Essentially, this starter set comes with a dice set, which are basically themed D6 dice, so you don't need the dice. There are image tokens that represent characters that you use to play through the game. It comes with 4 maps, essentially, a double-sided 2-map large sheets. Comes with a beginner rulebook, which is the core rulebook, but reduced some. It comes with a beginner-friendly adventure that can, of course, branch out into larger things. It can be short, it can be small, it can be hard, it can be easy. It also comes with 6 pre-gen characters that range from a Space Marine down to an Imperial Guard. So, the box set, I think I got it for less than $20 from a local game store. Like I said, it's incomplete. The outer box of it was pretty much done, so that I don't have anymore. I have the 2 books, the character sheets, the tokens, the maps, and really that's all you need. But before we go any further, if you like what you're hearing, you want to see more of it, or see some of the other hobby content I do, paint minis, skirmish games, stuff like that. Make sure to subscribe to the channel down below, like, comment about this tabletop RPG if you've played it, what you like about it, what you don't, compared to other systems. Just let me know. Let's get into it. Alright, so like I said, it comes with tokens. They're pretty nice tokens. They're acrylic tokens. And there's more here that I think than you actually need for what the campaign is that they gave you. But I'll be using miniatures for when we run through. But these are nice. We got character sheets. So I really like that they go through a wide range of basically character strengths, because you got Space Marines with Inquisitor, Imperial Commissars, you got Sisters of Battle, Imperial Guardsmen. Very, very well defined character sheets. It looks like a lot, and it is. But I think that's with almost every tabletop RPG. There's some out there that are less than this, but it's about to be it's expected, I think. So this is a tiny little adventure, and it's split into 2 halves. It's got a bunch of GM guides on the sides throughout the whole thing. You don't have to do both halves, or you can. And you can basically adjust the difficulty as you're playing through this. And then what we'll go over first is the beginner's rulebook here. So right off the bat, some of the big differentiators that I like with this system so far. One is the tiered play that it offers. So in this game, Wrath and Glory, it's called the tier system. It's like a core feature of the system. So basically it defines the power level and the scope of the campaign that you're playing. It helps make sure that characters and enemies and story elements are matched in scale to everything and the narrative tone and stuff like that. So from super basic human tier to Primaris Marine, God tier, that kind of thing. So it's tiers 1 to 4. Tier 1, you could basically actually play like a Necromunda type campaign with gangers, guardsmen, low-level Adeptus Mechanicus, stuff like that. Tier 2, Sisters of Battle, Commissars, and Inquisitorial Acolytes. Then Tier 3, we start to get into Space Marines, Psychers, Rogue Traders. And Tier 4, we get into Elite Space Marines like Death Watch, high-level Chaos Champions. Yes, I said Chaos. Those are the quote-unquote bad guys. But these tier levels also go with the scope as well. So Tier 1, you get local problems, hive gangs like Necromunda. And then Tier 4, you got galaxy impacting events, huge problems that you need to go after. So, and then the other thing I think that sets us apart, which you may have caught on while I was going through the tiered play there, but you can play, and the game is set up this way, Marines, Imperial Guard, stuff like that. You can play the Chaos if you want. You can play Xenos if you want. You can play anything in the 41st millennium. And I think that's pretty cool, where other systems, you typically have to get some kind of, supplement to the system. This is kind of just built in. You can even play orcs. So the layout of this rulebook's pretty good. Right away, they bring you into the basic stuff. What's a role-playing game? This is geared towards someone who's maybe not played a role-play game before, and they've come from wargaming. They've been playing Warhammer 40k, and they want to try this out because they love the universe, stuff like that. So this is going to help them out. One of the first things they have is example plays here in a cool little comic style, which I really appreciate. It looks cool to look. It's fun to look at. It kind of helps bring the essence of tabletop to life in a little comic book style play. It has how you play in here a little bit, some of the basics of rolling dice, taking tests. So I do appreciate that. You don't see that too often. Shortly after, you go into things like the core rules, dice. Sometimes that can be confusing because you see people playing D&D. They got these weird 20-sided dice, 12-sided dice, whatever. This is just D6s here. So it's super simple, super accessible. You probably already have those laying around. Then it goes into the glossary. So if you're new to tabletops, this is going to be super helpful. It's in the front, so while you're going through rules, you can mark this page, you know exactly where it's at. It's a one page, 1 1/4 page. We move into characters here. This is pretty similar to most tabletops. You got your attributes for your characters, your different traits, defenses, resiliences, speeds, wounds. We got mental traits. Then we go into skills. Well, this part is here. This is different for me. So we go into the core mechanics with the D6 dice here. Essentially, you're taking your attribute and your skill for the action you want to take, the test, and you put them together, and that gives you your dice pool. And then you're rolling all those D6s. When you're rolling, you'll have one D6 that is differentiated, whether it's bigger, smaller, or a different color. That's going to be your Wrath dice. So you determine your dice pool. That's with the skills and attributes. Then you have that one dice. If you have any modifiers or anything, you add that to the dice pool as well. Whatever you're doing the test against, you have to beat that difficulty number. Now when you're rolling the dice, what you want are 4s and 5s. Those are going to give you what are called icons. 6s will give you exalted icons, which is worth 2. Ones, twos, and threes are considered failures. So basically, you want enough icons to either match or beat the difficulty number. Another cool thing is shifting your dice. So say, we'll take the same example as last time. You need a 3. You roll out of your 6 dice. You roll 1 6, 2 4s, and a 5. So that's 3 single icons and 1 double icon with the 6. So you've made the difficulty number with the 3 single icons, but you have a 6 left over. Well, you can go ahead and you can shift that into something that gives you more of a benefit. So you can get more information with it, improve the quality of what you're doing. So example here, forging documents to be more convincing, or you can do stuff faster. You can also shift exalted icons as part of an attack to get an extra damage dice. So that's pretty cool. And you can also take that shifted dice, instead of doing all that, and add it to a pool that is a group pool. So no one person gets it all. And you can bank that for later use, and that'll be your glory pool. So earlier I mentioned with your dice pool that one has to be discolored, larger, smaller. It just has to be different than the rest of your dice. This is what they call a wrath dice. So you do this for the majority of your tests that you take. That's attacks, corruption tests, fear tests, skill tests, attribute tests. One of those dice needs to be a wrath dice. And basically what that wrath dice does is it can either be a hindrance or it can be something good. So it all depends on the result, of course. If you roll a 6 on it, you gain a glory for the squad, a glory point. Plus you get a critical hit in your combat. If you roll a 1, that just adds a complication to the scene. These are basically negative outcomes that impact the scene or the character directly when you're playing. So the complications and gaining glory, those two things happen regardless of whether or not your test succeeds or fails. With the complications in the wrath dice, this is something that can be applied across the board with tabletop RPGs. And I don't think a lot of GMs or DMs really take this into account. But with the complication dice, the dice, it can answer the question of, did you succeed, with yes, but, or a no, and, on a failed. You're adding additional narrative to the play, so it's not just a yes or no. So it kind of just spices that up. And with the talk of wrath, we'll just go right into wrath points. So these are considered points that your character already has. Heroes, they start with 2 points at the beginning of each session. You can't carry these points over into your next session, so you use them or lose them. These are made to represent inner rage or your desperation to succeed, or your inner fire, however you want to go about it. But you can spend these basically during a test to reroll failures, restore shock, which is a stat that we'll get into later, improve defiance checks, which is something you do when you're on death's door, and to add narrative declarations. Initially reading that, you might be like, okay, so the player gets to decide what's going on in the narrative story? Exactly. There's an example right down here below. So to Melissa, the example here, basically, she spends a wrath point and then states that there's a refueling point of barrels that are stacked near a hangar door. She fires her las gun into it, the barrels, it lights them on fire, and that basically is a beacon for them to get picked up. So the GM has to agree to this. Normally they probably would, unless it's totally ridiculous, but this gives them the ability to add to the story in a positive way to help out the group. And of course, these can be gained throughout the story good role playing, accomplishing objects, you know, other stuff like GM thinks you did something really badass, go ahead, give them a wrath point. They deserve it. And we'll go into glory. So this is the other half of the game. So we did kind of wrath, now we're going to go into glory. This basically represents the hero's will to win, their collective determination and resolve. You're gaining glory. I kind of already went over that. You start each session with 0, and then that pool is a wide open pool for everybody in the party to use. You're going to want to discuss the usage of that with your party members. Typically, each party, you have a maximum capacity of 6, or number of players plus 2, whichever value is the highest. And then anything gained above that maximum number is essentially lost. So use it or lose it. Don't let it go to waste. When you're using glory points, you can increase dice pools. You can increase damage, increase severity of a crit hit, or seize the initiative. So you can take the turn of the bad guys. Speaking of initiative, so this game, and we'll just go back to this comic book here. This is essentially how initiative works. The group that's playing chooses who's going to go first. They choose the guardsman. And then the bad guys get to go after that. The GM gets to choose who's going to go. And then it kind of just goes back and forth. So spending that glory to seize the initiative basically means that the good guys get to go twice in a row. So you got your action economy going more than these guys here. That's how that works. So the next differentiator, it's not just the players that have glory. Essentially, the game master also has glory, but they call it ruin. They use it the same ways. Gaining it is through failed corruption tests from players, whenever they fail a fear test, or whenever the GM rolls a 6 on the wrath dice, I gain 1 ruin. And then I can spend that on activating abilities, interrupting the PCs, seizing the initiative the same way players can, rerolling failures, restoring shock, and soaking wounds. NPCs also can have their own runes, which is called a personal rune. Just really depends on who the PC is. So they call this tabletop, and it calls out another thing called failing forward. So this, I think, is another thing that isn't necessarily new to this tabletop RPG, but something that a GM should utilize when they're playing. And by that, I mean, like it states in here, role-playing games, failing rolls is always going to happen, and sometimes it can happen to someone quite a bit to where the game is not even fun to play. So failing forward is a good method to mitigate that feeling and bring a player out of that funk, you could say. 2 of the things they state in here is failing a test should not bring the action to a halt. So basically, they don't fail. Failing should have interesting consequences also. What they also say is failing forward does not mean that they always succeed, but basically there should be another step to the failing. And what they have here for examples are they fail, but they succeed still at a cost. Gain consequences, so tie it into some penalty or something to do with the character's gear. Maybe they are picking a lock or something like that, and their lockpick breaks. Story consequences, you can introduce new obstacles to overcome. Or raising the stakes. So while you're trying to cover ground, you fail the test, you cover the ground still, but you're attracting more bad guys. Chapter 2, then we go into combat. So this goes through encounters, how to do combat, different kinds of weapons, how to hurt people, explosions, all that kinds of stuff. Typically in an encounter, you do initiative. Like I said earlier, initiative is based on a turn order. Players go first, they pick who goes, then I pick who goes for the bad guys. And then you just go in that order until everybody's gone. That's 1 round. With glory, you can seize the initiative, and With the NPCs, I can do an interrupt, basically the same thing, but on the bad guy side. And we'll get into attacking. Essentially, it's an attack test. Just like any other test, you get your D6s ready. So you bring the number of dice equal to the attribute you're using and the skill. So say you're shooting a gun, that's your ballistic skill. And it does have a nice table here you can follow. Use your agility as well. So you want icons equal to or beating the target's defense. If you're successful and you want to shift over exalted icons for extra damage, you can do that here. You roll your extra damage dice, count the icons, and then you add that to the weapon's damage value to generate the damage that you've actually done. Then you compare that damage to the resilience of the target. And then if you have any wrath dice, say for critical hits, you account for that, and then that basically does the damage. And then it rolls out a whole example here to go through all the steps for you. Very nice. These are the kinds of things that these kinds of books need. Another neat thing, which isn't necessarily new, but I like that they have it in here, because when you think of 40,000, you think of huge armies, wargaming on the table with massive armies, especially with orcs. You got the Green Sea, or Nurgle with their poxwalkers and stuff like that. We can get mobs in here. So basically, mobs are big groups. The size is determined by the GM, but big groups of NPCs that can come after characters, and they have special attacking abilities, how they take damage, stuff like that. And this is very similar to minions in D&D 4th edition. So mobs are filled with troops. Each one only has one wound. As the mob takes damage and loses troops, it basically is a mob until it's reduced to a single troop. And you go into melee, it's essentially the same thing. One cool thing with melee is that if you have a weapon that has the keyword pistol, you can actually use that in melee range and still shoot. This part kind of annoys me. So when you're making an attack, it has all this stuff here, and it kind of randomly goes into scattering. So area of effect weapons impact a large area rather than a single opponent. And then it goes into step 4. I don't understand why this is here. When you go 10 pages forward, 11 pages forward, and they have explosions and area of effect attacks here. And it better matches up with the area of effects table here. So that is one thing with this book that could be moved around a little bit. So another neat thing I think that goes with this tabletop is what they consider reloads. So you can use an action to reload, but reload doesn't necessarily mean that you have to reload your bullets. Of course, that is one of the actions. Essentially, everybody in this game is considered efficient with their weapons, so they're not typically wasting ammo and needing to reload. They usually have enough ammo to last them the whole session. But if they need to, in certain circumstances, you can use an action to reload. But if you want to do other things like a multi-attack, when you multi-attack, say you're shooting more than one person, you get a difficulty number penalty on every shot. So you can use a reload to take away that difficulty number penalty. Also, if you want to do a salvo, which is a certain kind of ability that you have, you can use one reload. Suppressive fire works the same way. You expend a reload to activate suppressive fire. So automatically built in, we'll go into critical hits here. On your wrath die, when you roll a 6, you get a critical hit. That means you get to roll on this critical hit chart. Typically, critical hits are pretty mundane. Double the damage, roll 2 dice, take the higher number. Stuff like that is what you're doing. Well, here in this game, it's very narrative and story driven. So you have these cool outcomes. You roll D66, it's basically 2 6s. One's the 10, one's the single digit. And you go through, you got all these cool things. Bone-shattering impact, crimson ash. You turn your target turns being on fire, merciless strikes, headshot, visceral blow, grisly amputation, sweet stuff like that. So I like that they include this in here. It really takes a lot off of the GM, and it really fleshes out what actually is happening with these certain critical hits that you're landing. Some of the last few things here I just want to go over quickly are shock and our defiance checks here. So shock is basically, that's a stat that every character starts with, and when damage exceeds your resilience, that's when you actually suffer shock. When you get down to 0 shock, you are said to be exhausted, which has additional effects on you. As for like troops go, so those are what you would consider going into a mob, very low level NPCs. When they get shock, basically they just die. So they have it laid out pretty brutal in the book. Think of a soldier going unconscious or having a panic attack, falling in the mud and just suffocating in the mud and not having the will to get back up. Just totally resigning themselves to death just to get out of the current situation. And defiance checks are done when your wounds reach 0. Basically, your death saves. If a character makes their defiance checks after failing the first or second check, you get 3 of them. After the third one, if you fail, you're dead. You either get a maim from the maiming table or a memorable injury. The maiming table is pretty cool. It kind of lays it out for you, what it's like. Different body parts. Still uses the D6. And you can roll and see what happens there. And then when you get to the memorable injury, so basically it gives you some flavor for your character. You get battle scars or fearsome scars, severe burns, a broken jaw, torn ear, things like that. The third chapter in this book is about adventuring, which there's not anything of significance in this area that is much different than what you can get in any other tabletop RPG. Just goes over encounter times, how long an encounter is supposed to be in game time, pacing when you're traveling, environmental hazards, things like that, resting, and what they call respite and regroup. It's all pretty familiar with everything else you find in normal tabletop RPGs. Chapter 4, going to WARGEAR. This is going over ammo, armor penetration, ammunition and reloading, different kinds of guns, different keywords that are with guns, whether it's pistol, heavy, rapid fire, all that kind of stuff, salvo. It does get into some of the traits and stats on some of these guns, so that's pretty cool. The basic things that you see within Warhammer 40k. We get into explosives, orc weapons, the classic chain sword, and then our last chapter here is the bestiary. Goes over the different kinds of what they say are threats. Those are opponents. So I mentioned troops already. Those are the tiny guys that go into the mob. Elites are just powerful enemies, and adversaries are usually named NPCs, monstrous creatures. Those are the huge monsters that will annihilate you in like one hit. Goes over how to use wrath and ruin. Have some basic stat blocks for some of these NPCs. Pretty standard stuff here in the back. Nothing too crazy. And that's the end of what they call the beginner's rulebook. I do want to touch on the adventure briefly. It's called Escape the Rock. Essentially, this is an introductory adventure. There's 2 parts. Part 1, the Wrecking Yard. Part 2, Daemonus Rex. They can be split apart, and you can do the first part and skip the second part if you'd like, or you can do both parts together. It's really up to the GM and how the new players are feeling, you know. They gear this towards a new player, which is quite obvious as how they state stuff in here. They've got the GM guidance columns on the sides of these pages, which are very helpful, especially I'd imagine with a new GM. And it starts right away with, after a brief overview of both parts, it starts right into the first part, the wrecking yard, and it gives you the narration and stuff that you want to do. You read beforehand, you get a feel for everything. And then all throughout this adventure, it gives you GM guidance. It even gives you, in this part here specifically, mock scenarios. So going through hostile environments on the rock. In this case, it's an orc ship. You can do any one of these and have your players run into those, either Knob, Gang Boss, Patrol of Boys, or the Gretchen Scrappers. So it's nice that they actually give you something to go off of, again pointing back to new players or new GMs. And overall, I think that this is very well laid out for new GMs and old GMs. It just makes it very easy to run. It has references back to the beginner rulebook, has the narrations for you. It tells you how to play certain characters or how to speak certain characters, their personalities. And then it goes into our part 2 here, and it's just more of the same. So for the price that I got the starter set, I definitely think it's worth it so far. Comes with some nice acrylics. It's supposed to come with dice, but that's fine. They're just D6s. They didn't come with this specific set as it was a previously owned. Nice laid out rule book. The format is really nice for new GMs, and same with the adventure. Lots of hints and stuff that you might not think of as a new GM, something you really only get after doing it for a while. And it comes with the nice pre-made character sheets that has a nice spread with characters. I think it's pretty good value for all that stuff. Now we are going to play it next weekend and see how it goes. That's it for that review. That was Warhammer Wrath Glory, the starter set. And it looks like it'd be good for Warhammer players that want to get into tabletop RPGs if you have a lot of models. There you go. Second use for those very expensive pieces of plastic you have. Anyway, that's it for this week. I don't have much more. I hope you learned something today about the tabletop RPG world, and maybe you'd want to dive in with this, being your first one. Most importantly, I hope you play something in the next coming week, because we got to keep ourselves happy. I'll talk to you later.